Brother Penn, would you like to comment on how our doctrinal statement came to have the additions and improvements that we have?
Well, Tim, you know that nothing is forever because time changed, and then you have a reason to add more of what you believe to keep yourself distinguished from the world. And what I'm seeing here in this new one, in fact, when I started preaching, there were 13 very simplistic statements, and they'd been in use since the early 1800s, or maybe longer than that. And so they begin to add one occasionally or clarify a little bit of one or the other. And so there was a time when all the ex-presidents of the ABA were voted to form a committee and update our articles of belief. And it took them quite a long time because they made them quite a bit longer. And in these that I'm looking at now, I think there may be another addition or two. They did add that scriptural baptism is administered by a New Testament church in a New Testament way to a believer. And in so doing, that stated landmarkism and the fact that we would rebaptize someone who had even been immersed, and we didn't consider it scriptural baptism. And then they also redefined and stated about the Lord's Supper, made it a little clearer. And that is that the Lord's Supper is for the members of the church only, and that we do not invite anyone other than our own members. Made it a lot clearer. And the reason for that was that at one time, the Saline Association, at the end of the associational year, they observed the Lord's Supper. And so they had to quit that when they had to define that this way. And it got defined this way because of Bogart's school. That's how they referred to the seminary. It wasn't the Missionary Baptist Seminary. It was Bogart's school.
Oh,
and that's what he had taught. And people were beginning to believe what he taught. And then the pulpit affiliation, it had pretty well subsided to the point that it would have been unusual for someone to invite someone of another faith to address the congregation. I remember one time when I was at Cave City, at first revival we had, I'd met the Methodist preacher who was just down the street from where our church was. And he came in and I talked to him, and he gave a real solid description of his faith, that he was born again, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I called his name in a revival meeting and asked him to lead us in prayer, and he did. But I got a lot of feedback that we don't ask preachers that are not Baptists to pray in our congregation. And I said, well, thank you for telling me. I'll not do it anymore. But I think more than anything, Brother Bogart's preaching on the radio came on at 8 o'clock on Sunday morning before people had to leave for church. It was just ideal, and it went right up the valleys, Mississippi, you might say, right into Illinois and even into Michigan occasionally when it was good weather. So people knew who he was, and he taught. Instead of just preaching an evangelistic sermon, which we would normally think he would do every service, he taught Baptist doctrine and explained who he was and why he believed it. So I think that's why people finally begin to say, well, we're not going to have a meeting with Methodists and then divide the converts up to go to the Baptist church or the Methodist church. But doctrinal statements are necessary. And we need to understand that from time to time they do need to be updated. In fact, when I was pastor at North Bryant, we updated ours early to deal with the same-sex marriages and homosexuality as being unscriptural, et cetera, et cetera.
So y'all were ahead of that.
We were ahead of it quite a few years. I just anticipated that if we do not permit same-sex marriages in our building or on our property. We need to get ahead of it so that if someone comes and we refuse them, we can point back to a time before anyone was requesting it, and that would hold up in court.
Oh, very good, very wise.
If you just say, someone walks in and said, I want to use your building, you say, well, no, for homosexual marriage, and you say, no, we don't permit that. They say, well, when did you start that? Just with me and my man here or my woman there? And so it was important to get what you want done in and on your property before the issue ever comes up.
That's very good. So that's a good recommendation. All right. Well, thank you very much for updating us on the value of our doctrinal statement.
Well, we need one, and we have a good one.
Amen.